recording. And say welcome everyone to the last of our calls for this year, which is quite a scary thing to say. It's already almost Christmas, as we were just discussing. So I guess many of us will be off imminently, sort of taking some time out to do other things, which will be lovely. But in the meantime, the DNS is forever. And as Josh just put in the chat, we've got the 12 days of DNS. I'm sure that must be a thing. If it isn't, it probably ought to be from now. So let me share my screen. I'll give you my non-festive intro. So some of you will be aware that although it was entitled the Christmas,
wait.
Although it was titled the Christmas Karaoke Edition, we're not going to do that. As Chris, you may have heard Peter protesting in the background, so it's sort of false advertising, for which I apologise. But it turns out that Peter has many talents, but singing is not one of them. I'm sure there are some others which we could list if we had plenty of time. But anyway, so instead we won't do the Christmas karaoke, but I will talk about a few things that have happened, and then who knows, we may get on to something a bit more light-hearted along the way, depending what other people have got to contribute. So I'm going to go straight in to just talk about some recent developments and a few other things, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on an announcement from the IAB last Friday, just in case people have yet to have had a chance to pick it up. There's various things in the news. So, for example, I won't go through all of these, but ICANN have announced some sort of changes to the agreements with registries and registrars to help them to undertake compliance actions if those parties are not correctly handling DNS abuse. So they're sort of tightening up on DNS abuse, which is a good thing. A couple of slightly unusual uses of the DNS. So Cloudflare have used it to estimate the state of IPv6 adoption, and you'll see an article on that. And sort of coincidentally, there's also a piece, a two-part article from Infoblox, which is looking at the implications that the use of IPv6 poses for both attackers and security researchers, which I thought was quite an interesting pair of articles. And I think with at least one of those, I think it was the Infoblox pair of articles, I misedited my document, so you got a spurious link in the email sort of weekly headlines that I sent out. So this is the correct link, which is not in the email. So apologies for any confusion. You'll find this linked via the web page with the recording when that's available, sort of later this week. As I say, I'm not going to go through all of these. The sort of few malware related things, which again were quite interesting. And a PCF from DNS Filter, just looking at the use of machine learning to help identify risky domains purely by looking at the domain string. Again, interesting to see machine learning being applied in this space. I should also mention that there are a couple of calls for adoption which technically expired last Friday, but it may still be possible to post your thoughts. Well, it is still possible to post your thoughts on the ADD mailing list. Obviously, it's down to the chairs should they decide to take them into account. So if you've not commented yet but wish to do so, details of both of those, dedicated credentials to host encrypted DNS forwarders on CPE is one, and handed encrypted DNS server redirection is the second. just a reminder to put comments on those, and hopefully the chairs will take those into account. But one of them's on the call, he may wish to comment if they're going to ignore them or take them into account if he chooses to. And then, yeah, a couple of other items of interest. One at the bottom of the screen first, which is it's interesting that the European Commission is I think this is under the Digital Services Act, is starting a probe on it's the alleged failure at this stage of Elon Musk's X to curb toxic content, as it says in the headline. So I think that's the first well, certainly the first I've seen under the DSA. So it'd be interesting to see how that progresses over the coming months. Yeah, then it is alleged. Just seeing Peter's comment in the chat. Some of us may argue it's plain and obvious, but I suppose they haven't done the investigation, let alone proved it at this stage. Yeah, and then the one I was just going to spend a couple of minutes on is the statement from the IAB on encryption and mandatory client-side scanning of content. This has been so in the offing for in preparation, I should say, for quite a few months. I think the lead author of the statement is, or certainly was, Mallory Nodal, who many of you will know from CDT, who's one of the IAB members, and she was sort of leading on in the various IAB meetings that I sort of sat in on, as any of us can. Just by sort of dialing in when they hold their weekly meetings. So it's had a longish gestation, but it was finally published on Friday last week. I haven't been able to put it all on the screen. It'll take you too long to read, but it's not a especially lengthy statement. You'll see the start of it on the screen in front of you at the moment. It's definitely worth taking a look at. And it just sort of, in not that many words, sets out that broadly the IB is against the idea of mandatory client-side scanning of content. And it gives some indication as to why it's against it, but as I say, it doesn't go into a lot of detail. In fact, it goes into so little detail that one of the issues, I believe, with the statement as it currently stands is it doesn't actually give a definition of client-side scanning, nor is it that specific about which aspect or aspects of it it finds objectionable in any detail. And I think it would be improved were it to do that. Those of you that have an interest, if you look at some of the posts on the mailing list, and I'm going to come on to a couple in a second. I have, in one of two posts I've made on this, on the architecture discuss mailing list, pointed out the importance of adding definitions here, because otherwise, if the IB is just against client-side scanning, then that means it's against the stuff. It's against scanning for malware, for example, and I don't believe it is against scanning for malware. So I think they just need to tighten up on what it is they're against, rather than just making a very broad brush statement. They're quite a headline if it turned out the IB was against malware scanning, but there you are. Two comments I have pulled out. One is from Mark Nottingham. Again, this is not a comment in its entirety. This one's posted to the main IETF mailing list. Unfortunately, there are comments in both the IETF mailing list as well as the architecture discussed mailing list. So that just complicates matters. But Mark's comment, I think, basically is calling out the fact that the IB is commenting on a policy sort of human rights matter, rather, and he's not overly impressed, and you get the gist of that from the text. on the screen, which is roughly half of his complete comment. It was worth reading at your leisure if you're so inclined. But I thought it was quite interesting, and he is a former IEB member himself, as it says at the very start. So I was intrigued that he felt it wasn't an appropriate statement from the IEB in the way that it's written. And then a second statement from Stuart Bryant. I think this is on the Architecture Discussed mailing list rather than the IETF one. But again, there's suggesting it's not a good statement. There are supportive statements as well, I should say, for balance. Just I pulled these two out because they raise some interesting issues. There are also some issues as to whether it has negative consequences for open source software. Although Vittoria Bertola, who many of you will know, who's on this call as well. I think Vittoria, you commented in your post that you didn't see that it posed a problem to open source software, despite the assertions from some that they thought that it did. And given it's an area that you're very familiar with, I certainly valued your comment on that, because I was slightly unsure why people felt it posed issues for open source software. But yeah, so I was reassured when I saw your comment that you thought that it didn't, which was quite good. As I say, somebody's raised their hand. Oh, Vittorio, yes, please. Yes, unmute and please speak rather than me speaking for you, and I'll stop sharing.
No, I just noticed that Ecker has a sort of answer to my comment, implying that what he would expect maybe governments to do is to force some kind of attestation of the software that runs on the client. So basically to protect the part of the code in open source applications that would verify whether locally all the checks are made. The governments could require some kind of certification of the code that runs on the client, and so this could limit the use of open source. But it's I think quite a long shot in terms of what could happen. So I think I really don't see a big issue unless, yeah, it could be the governments start to require servers to verify software on clients, or even the OS makers on mobiles to verify the stuff. But I don't really see this happening. So I really don't think this is a particular problem for open source.
Okay. So it's not, if you like, an automatic issue in any case. It would require the government to take certain steps for it to become potentially an issue. That makes more sense. Okay. Well, thanks for the clarification. I hadn't at this point seen the comment from Ecker, so it's useful to have that addition. But yeah, it clearly then doesn't mean that it automatically means that there's a problem, unless there are additional points raised. I'll just pause there for a moment rather than talking at you. See if anyone else has had a chance to look at the IAB statement and has any particular points on it. So if you do, feel free to sort of join the conversation either by posting something in the chat or better still by unmuting and speaking. If you have a comment to make. I can see Vicky, you put, oh, I see, you put Ecker's comment in the chat that Vittoria was just referring to. So that's sort of, helpful to see. That was, I think, on the IETF mailing list rather than the Architecture Discussed mailing list. I think, Vittoria, or am I misremembering? Oh, it's on Architecture Discussed.
I think it's on the main. My part of the thread is, well, I don't remember because there are now 2 threads in the do list, so I don't remember which is which.
Yes, yeah, it does make it a bit confusing, doesn't it, that people are commenting separately on both of them. So I'll just check again. Did anyone else have any sort of strong point of view in favour or not against the IAB statement. Be curious to know if anyone. I see Darren's asking for the link, which I might have it to hand.
Yes. This is Darren. I don't know if I'm muted. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Great. I didn't get a chance to read the whole thing there, but from what I read in the first two lines, I really like it. Because if I'm reading it right, I made a comparison while I was there too, to privacy, but also the right to expect that your data is protected. And I kind of drew the analogy that while we totally agree with everything they're doing on the internet, that once it lands in the enterprise, that we are now the custodians of that data, and we need to be able to see it to protect it and ensure performance. And I even went as far as to ask, I said, you all have banking needs, you all have doctor appointments, there's all these different things that you do online. Do you not expect to have security and performance in those? And I thought it would maybe be a moment for them to understand, this does affect me. But now they just kind of looked at me with blank looks and pressed on. So I'm glad to see this coming back around if I was reading it correctly. You'd think at some point they would have an aha moment, but did I read it correct?
Well, I'll let others comment on that, Darren, but I suspect that by publishing it now, it will lead to a fair debate on the sort of two mailing lists. And I hope, and I have requested the IB do this, that they do allow time for a sort of discussion on the statement during the meeting in Brisbane as well, because I think that would be really beneficial, given it does raise a bunch of different issues.
Yes.
Which would be useful to discuss.
Well, thanks for doing that. It'd be nice to see where it goes, right?
Yes, indeed. Simon, you've raised your hand. Did you want to come in with a comment?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find what I mean. My audio is already live.
Yes, it's working now.
I forget these things comes in live, and I actually need to shut it off. It's all back to front compared to everybody else. Just speaking carefully, because I'm a government employee and I do appear here as a government employee, but I don't appear giving official views or official policy. I think that the main awkwardness for me is that what it doesn't say. It sort of has no view on things like child sexual exploitation, and from the CSA, it mentions it. And unfortunately, it de facto protects it.
Yeah.
It doesn't say we protect it, but it doesn't say we're against it either. It appears to give no option for anything that is against the good of society. It just simply says, encryption. Well, it says by implication, encryption will solve all our problems. And I would suggest it takes a rather too simplistic view of the world. If encryption will solve all our problems, well, we probably wouldn't need encryption, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yes, well, you'll see I did in first of my two posts so far on the Architecture Discuss, ask the question of the IB whether they were proposing a further statement on that aspect, on how to address the harms sort of caused, to which I've not seen an answer as yet. Maybe that will come in due course, but I think that would be a useful thing to give clarity on. I almost commented but decided not to because I couldn't be bothered with the responses, to point out that it seemed at one point to be conflating encryption with security, which I think, as many of us have discussed many times, you can have security without privacy. You certainly can't have privacy without security, but encryption is not security. which was surprising that it wasn't crisp, in my view, in distinguishing between those. You would have thought a statement from the IAB would want to be really clear that privacy and security are different things, and need different steps taken. But anyway, that's sort of a personal view.
Yes, it
That's
does
been
read a
shared
bit like a
before.
statement for obfuscation almost.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, thanks, Simon. Suzanne, you had your hand raised and you loaded it. Did you have a comment you wished?
Yeah, just a couple of things. And I hesitated to comment because I've only read the IAB statement once. I was going to go back to it. But sort of in general, first of all, Mark Nottingham is a really smart guy. And there's nothing novel about ex-members of the IAB, arguing with the IAB. I do it all the time. I think to the extent that whatever the criticisms of the statement, and I'm hearing a pattern that I'm going to go back and look for, talking about the question, talking about the impact of content control on the infrastructure is something that should be done. Not because anybody has all the answers, but because you don't want to not take those things into account at all. This is a very active space for back and forth. And, I suspect there are things in the IAB statement that I disagree with just because there usually are. But I think the conversation is really healthy and really important to have. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And of course, they do reference out RFC 2804, which those of us that don't memorize all the RFCs, that refers to wiretapping. And when I had a look at that, I was interested to see that although that was itself a statement from the IAB and the IESG jointly, if I understood it correctly, because it's from about 20 odd years ago, so it's before my time with the IETF, it came about in response effectively to a request from the wider community to sort of develop a positioning statement, whereas I think this time around I think the IAB has itself elected to make a statement on this topic, but at least perhaps on the back of that, as you say, Suzanne, if that does lead to a debate within the community, that would be a good thing. Albeit, I think in the past there's been a position that the IETF doesn't do policy, whereas I think this clearly is policy, with a sort of a passing reference to technology, but it's mainly a policy question, I think. But as
I don't think it's, I think they are squarely getting in the space of David Clark's paper on the tussle, right? They're doing the iterations that normally occur when there's discussion of this nature, when there's surveillance versus scanning or other types of technologies. And so I wouldn't call it policy. I think it's just a technical tussle, and it's the weight that they have. And I'm sorry, I have to drop.
So on that bombshell, thank you, Kathleen.
No, I will support. Then Kathleen, I will carry the torch, because I think you're absolutely right. And I actually had that in the back of my mind when I was thinking about commenting on this.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay. Thanks for joining, Kathleen. Anyone else with any thoughts on the topic? You may not have had a chance to read the document yet. As I say, it didn't come out till sort of late Friday. I'll just pause and see if anybody else does have any thoughts as yet. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other comments in the chat currently. no hands raised, so I'm assuming not. But if you haven't already done so, well worth a read. And as I say, I hope it will lead to a discussion both on the mailing lists, plural, so the main IETF at IETF mailing list, as well as architecture discuss as well in the run into the meeting in Brisbane in 3 months roughly from now, pretty much, give or take. So it's coming on quite soon now. Okay, let me go back to my screen sharing for a moment. I don't think I've got a huge amount more to share, so there will be time for any other business and or anyone wants to attempt any sort of form of entertainment. But firstly, in terms of calls for papers and workshop proposals, if you were planning to put forward a presentation proposal for NaNog 90 next February, the deadline is today, so you need to submit that quickly if you've not already done so. And then also this month, so I mention it now because we won't have another call in time, Eurodig has got a call for issues which completes at the end of this month, end of December. Actually, that's an error. I think it's changed the third one down on the slide. The IGF, that the deadline for the IGS call for thematic inputs is actually the 31st of January. So you've got more time for that. But NaNog and Eurodig are the two main ones. NaNog for today, Eurodig by the end of this month, if you want to submit some suggested issues to be addressed in the Eurodig meeting in Vilnius, I think it is, in June of next year. And thank you in the meantime. I've been sort of speaking. See, Suzanne put the link to the paper that Kathleen referred to on Tussle. Okay, so I'll take that as a reminder. In terms of forthcoming events, the next one coming up is the OARC 42 at the beginning of February, so that's not so far away now. What, 6 weeks or so, 6-7 weeks before that comes around, so it's going to come around soon. I haven't checked the website in the last few days, so I don't know if the program is up yet or not. Whether the content has been selected, but and I think the sort of the early bird rate will runs for a couple more weeks or so. So if you're planning to go in person, it's worth registering sooner rather than later for that. Also, as it's highlighted, just a reminder that you can register now for the IETF meeting in Brisbane. So registration has been open for a couple of weeks, and the number of registered attendees was sort of slowly clocking up when I last checked a few days ago. And the sort of details of the sort of preferred or the conference hotel are also up, which is less expensive than many of the IETF venue hotels have been of late. So it's I think it's 290 Australian dollars a night, I think, which is somewhat less expensive than some of the recent hotel choices, as I recall. Then finally, from me at least for the moment, in terms of future call topics, our next call will be on the 8th of January. So if you're planning to join on the 25th of December or the 1st of January, you will be disappointed, I'm afraid to say. So don't do that. But 3 weeks, 8th of January, of course, will resume. And since I've already mentioned the OARC meeting, we'll have some of the OARC team on to just give a sort of preview of that meeting, which will be a month away at that point. So if you want to know more about what's planned or anything, then I think Dinesh and or Steve will be on to sort of talk about the plans then, and then we're back to the normal schedule from that point on. But no calls for the next 2 weeks. 8th of January will be our first one back in the new year. So I think that was probably it for me. Yes, it was. So let me stop sharing. just pause to see if anyone has anything else that you want to bring up. We have plenty of time for that if you do. Or equally any seasonal related things that you wish to do instead. So either of those will be fine.
I don't have anything in particular to raise. It's not even karaoke, sorry. But and I've missed a few meetings lately because I've had stuff going on. But I do want to say thank you to Andrew again for setting up this meeting every week. And consistently finding interesting topics to look at, sending out the news roundup every week, and you know, it's the most useful meeting that I have every week, a regular meeting that I have, and it's yeah. Thank you very much for doing this for everyone, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
Oh, very kind. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you very much. Okay, moving swiftly on to see if anybody else has got anything you want to bring up. If you do, please do so. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Don't see any hands raised. Just give you a moment or two.
Actually, Andrew, if I could.
Oh, please, yes, please, Suzanne.
Yeah, just really briefly, I do suggest that anybody who that paper that Kathleen alluded to is really good and really worth reading if you work with tech policy at all, you know, regardless of whether you know, the specific IAB statement is of any great interest to you, because the paper sets out a particular way of looking at some of these things that I think lets people skip some of the obvious pitfalls in these discussions and help make them more productive.
I think I can safely say that many of the enthusiastic contributors to the IETF mailing list will not have read and probably won't plan to read that paper, but hopefully for those with more thoughtful contributions, that's a really good recommendation. So thank you, Suzanne. Right, last chance for anyone with anything else. And it's not looking like it, in which case, let me say thank you for joining. I hope you found the discussion useful. And have a fantastic break as and when it starts, hopefully sooner rather than later. Please don't come on the call on the 25th. That would be rather sad. So we'll hopefully I won't see any of you again, at least not as a group, until the 8th of January. But have a fantastic break as and when it starts. So happy Christmas if that's what you celebrate. A happy holiday if not, and happy New Year as well. And see you back again hopefully on the 8th to learn more about the OARC meeting in Charlotte in February. So see you then. Have a great time off. Bye all.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. Likewise.